What? It's a little bit early. Why are we getting started right now? Well, I'll tell you here in a minute. Once the stream is alive and well across the internet, then we'll break it down. What is going on here today? And it looks like things are alive and well, so let's go ahead and get started. Hello, my friends, and welcome back to yet another episode of Watching the Watchers Live. My name is Robert Gruler. I am a criminal defense attorney here at the R&R Law Group in the always beautiful and sunny Scottsdale, Arizona, where my team and I, over the course of many years, have represented thousands of good people facing criminal charges. And throughout our time in practice, we have seen a lot of problems with our very justice system. I'm talking about misconduct involving the police. We have prosecutors behaving poorly. We have judges not particularly interested in a thing called justice. And it all starts with the politicians, the people at the top, the ones who write the rules and pass the laws that they expect you and I to follow, but sometimes have a little bit of difficulty doing so themselves. And that's why we started this program called Watching the Watchers Live, so that together we can shine that big, beautiful spotlight of accountability and transparency back down upon that very system with the hope of encouraging some meaningful change. And we're early here today. Normally we go live 2 hours from now. Today it's 3 o'clock p.m. Arizona time, 5 p.m. on the East Coast, 2 p.m. on the West Coast. We're early. Unfortunately, folks, I've got a board meeting that I got to get to here at about 5:30 Arizona time. So we've got about a couple hours, and then I got to hop off and go get prepped for this board meeting. Very important business. Got to attend to it. So I apologize for coming on early. But if you are going to be missing the live portion of this, I do hope you come back and, of course, watch the replay. We've got a lot of stuff to get into today. We're going over a little bit of the weekend leftovers. We're going to be talking about a representative by the name of Jason Crow, who talked to some high-level members of the military, the armed services, the National Guard, and he published his notes about what happened on the Capitol Hill last week during those riots. And so we want to break down the conversation. He told us about, what some of the people who were on the inside and were sort of managing the response to the chaos, and he's shared those notes with us. So we want to break those down and see if we can answer and sort of piece together what happened a little bit more. We've also got news that the Democrats have introduced, are in the process of introducing a second round of articles of impeachment, article singular of impeachment, it looks like, and that is going in on today or very, very soon, very shortly. But we have a draft which was published by NBC News, so we're going to go through that, detail a little bit about what's in there. They're calling this sort of incitement to violence, incitement to insurrection, and so we want to talk about incitement. What does it mean? Okay, the Supreme Court has ruled on this, and we're going to talk about a case called Brandenburg, which was dealt with back early in the 60s, I believe, and it gives us some guidance on how to determine what is incitement, what is not incitement, and we'll have a couple examples that we'll go through. We're also going to talk about Mitch McConnell and his response. Remember, the way that an impeachment works is it's initiated in the House of Representatives, which is already underway, but it has to be transferred over to the Senate, and Mitch McConnell has detailed a memo that he sent out to other Republicans that explains why he doesn't think this is going to go anywhere once it does reach the Senate. We've got another resolution introduced by a guy named Raskin, Representative Raskin over from Maryland, that wants to sort of address the 25th Amendment, asking Mike Pence to withdraw Donald Trump from the office of the presidency. And then we've got some new arrests that we need to go through. The Qanon Shaman has been arrested. That happened over the weekend. We've got the probable cause statement, the warrant affidavit, and all that stuff. So we've got a lot to get into and not a ton of time to do it. So let's go ahead and get started. Before we do, want to invite you to subscribe to the channel if you have not already done so. It's a good time to join us in this conversation. We're going to be really detailing a lot of interesting, I think, legal analysis in the forthcoming weeks, months, and years. We want you to be a part of it. This is an interesting time in our country's history. A lot of legal issues to talk about, things like impeachment, 25th Amendment, but some other, I would say, more fundamental concepts like free speech. And so we want you to be here and be a part of that. As another reminder, if you're not familiar with the program, we do go through a presentation at first. I'm going to go through some slides. Those slides are all going to be available for you in our Discord server, which is a chat server that is free. You can join us and chat before the show, after the show, but the copy of the slides will be there and accessible to you. You can get a copy of my free book as well. There's a free PDF in there, and so there's no reason not to join. So we'd ask you to go on over and do that. If you have questions or you want to send in any super chats, Miss Faith is going to be clipping those, and we'll address those at the end of the presentation. So let's go ahead and get started. What I wanted to start off with today was a letter from Jason Crow. He made this public over the internet, and Jason Crow is a representative out of the state of Colorado, and he posted this on Twitter this weekend. He said here, my dad, I'm a former Army Ranger, assistant Little League baseball coach. This is his profile over on Twitter. You may know that a lot of people on Twitter are not around anymore, but Jason Crow certainly still is. And he posted this. He said, moments ago, I spoke with Secretary of the Army, Ryan McCarthy, about the military response to the January 6th Capitol attack and ongoing security measures. Here are the notes from my call. And last week, we spent some time talking about what happened there. It was a lot of chaos. It seemed to me like there was law enforcement that was very, very aggressive at first, but then there was speculating that there was a stand down order and the cops sort of just let people in and rummage around through the facility and then let them leave on their own accord. And so we were all sort of wondering, how does the most, or should be the most secure building, or one of them in our nation's capital, how is it so easily overrun by a couple thousand or a couple hundred, rioters, protesters, people who are going in there trying to, cause mayhem? And we were all left with a lot of questions, and so we're hoping we can glean some of this from Jason Crow. Now, he is an American attorney, so he's a lawyer, he's a veteran, he's a politician, member of the U.S. House Representative for the 6th Congressional District out of Colorado, Democratic Party, and it's also important to know that he was an impeachment manager during the first term in Congress at the impeachment trial of Donald Trump, right? And so you want to make sure that you understand who this person is, where he's coming from, and what some of his biases may be. Certainly does not sound like a fan of Donald Trump. He sort of was the manager of the first round of impeachment proceedings. And so you just have to read this with that hat on. Put that hat on and say, okay, now we know who he is. I don't think it takes away much from what he put in his notes, but just important for context, I would think. And here it is. So he posted this over the weekend. Congressman Jason Crow releases a call summary with Secretary of the Army on January 6th Capitol attack. So it says here, today, Jason Crow spoke with the Secretary of the Army, a guy by the name of Ryan McCarthy, regarding the lead up and the subsequent events on January 6th, the insurrection, he calls it, at the U.S. Capitol. Call comes after Representative Crow, Representative Gallego. They sent a letter on Saturday to the Secretary requesting an urgent briefing for the House Armed Services Committee members detailing what the DOD did, which is the Department of Defense, and the National Guard, and their response and preparation for the upcoming inauguration. So, they're trying to get their bearings straight because in 9 days, we're going to have another big ceremony in Washington, D.C., and a lot of people are concerned about this. There are headlines all over the place today that the FBI is indicating there's going to be further sort of, protests, for further acts of potentially violence. And so everybody's trying to make sure we don't see what happened again, what happened on the Capitol Hill again. We certainly don't want that to happen. And so it's important, right? We should stop and sort of reflect and see how we can avoid this happening again. So here is the readout of the call that took place on January 10th. It says here, events before January 6th as detailed or relayed by Secretary McCarthy. So a couple bullet points here. Acting Secretary of Defense, a guy by the name of Christopher Miller, approved the deployment of 340 D.C. National Guard in non-tactical gear for traffic control pursuant to D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser's written request. And you may remember, but we talked about this last week, Mayor Bowser actually sent a letter on January 5th, one day before the Capitol Hill protests, largely indicating that they were good. They didn't need any other help. There was some indication from that letter. Now, we didn't see what she was responding to. We just saw her letter because she posted it on Twitter, and she sent it to a number of people in the security infrastructure apparatus. And she was indicating that we're all set. Don't send any more people here. We've got this thing covered. The Metro Police Department out of D.C., they know how to handle this stuff. They deal with protests all the time. And so, hindsight's, of course, 2020, but seemed to be, in my mind, a bit of a misjudgment. She posted that letter, and it read to me when we went through it that they didn't need any other help. They had everything under control. And so it looks like Chris Miller sent another 340 non-tactical officers over to D.C. The U.S. Capitol Police did not request DOD support, so nothing from the Department of Defense. The Department of Defense made several more attempts to offer the National Guard resources to the D.C. Police, the MPD, and the U.S. Capitol Police, and were told repeatedly that no additional resources were needed, which, of course, in hindsight was catastrophic mistake, right? They did need more resources. Due to the lack of additional requirements by local authorities, DC Guard was not prepared for other contingencies. Law enforcement and the DoD were preparing for a gathering similar in size to those that occurred on November 14th and December 12th, numbering in the low thousands. So they just clearly miscalculated. Law enforcement and DoD were preparing for small, disparate, violent events, things like stabbings, fistfights, and other things that were similar to past events and past rallies. But on so that was the preparation. But on January 6th, here's what happened according to, once again, Secretary McCarthy. Upon seeing the size of the rally outside of the White House, the DoD realized that there were a far greater number of participants than in previous gatherings, which everybody knew, right? I mean, there were people were talking about going to January 6th all over the country. I mean, you saw it on blogs, on Facebook, on everywhere you looked. So, there was no question in my mind that there was going to be a ton of people there. Mayor Bowser, U.S. Capitol Police Chief Sund, they requested urgent reinforcement between, and Sund, by the way, resigned or at least submitted his resignation the last I checked. So they were asking for urgent reinforcement at around 1:34 to 1:49 p.m., so that afternoon, but they were unable to articulate what they needed. Couldn't detail what resources and what locations needed some attention. After the calls with the mayor and the chief, the Secretary of the Army and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Miley, determined that full mobilization of the Guard and assets from D.C. and neighboring states was required. According to DoD policy, the D.C. Guard Mobilization Authority rests with the Secretary of Defense. The Secretary of Army retains operational control of the Guard force. So they're talking about, who can control what and where to send things. In the following period of time between 1:49 and 3 p.m. Eastern time, we have a number of different people who all work to understand the unfolding situation. So for about an hour and 11 minutes, they were trying to determine what to do. The Secretary of Army, it looks like the Capitol Police, the Acting Secretary of Defense, the Chief of the National Guard Bureau. So all of the major, people involved, Joint Chiefs of Staff, were all trying to figure out what to do. They sort of determined here that due to a lack of coordination and preparation, there was not a functioning operations center in the Pentagon, and they couldn't manage the Guard presence. They couldn't direct any additional resources, which left all of the senior Department of Defense officials to literally manage the situation by tracking down previously unknown contacts of local law enforcement and making ad hoc calls in an office environment. So, I mean, basically what they're doing is they're just pitching water out. The boat's sinking and they've all got buckets and they're just trying to pitch the water out as fast as they can. They haven't found a dock so that they can get off the boat, right? I mean, they're all just sort of scrambling, and we all watched it unfold. I mean, we did a live show right after the event unfolded, and it was chaos, and it would have been very hard to understand what was happening. And so they were experiencing largely the same things that we were. Once the Acting Secretary of Defense approved the deployment of additional guards, the units were mobilized and deployed to the Capitol, where they focused on creating a security perimeter and clearing the overrun buildings. So 2 questions about that we'll get to. And before we talk about, the security planning for the inauguration, one more bullet point. McCarthy represented that delays to the deployment of the Maryland Guards were not due to political interference, but rather due to the lack of a pre-planned requirement by the Pentagon as a result of deficient law enforcement threat reporting, and it didn't substantively impact the timeline for the Maryland Guards' arrival on location. And so that's sort of what happened. I mean, it sounds like it was just confusing as hell. They weren't properly prepared, and there was a lot of activity going on, a number of different agencies. We have the Acting Secretary of Defense, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs. We've got the Secretary of the Army. We've got the Mayor. We've got Chief Sund, the Metro PD, the Capitol Hill PD. I mean, a lot of different people, and everybody was sort of thinking that we're all good when we found out that we weren't. It was a free-for-all. Everybody was just trying to piece this stuff together until a time when they were able to establish a perimeter around the Capitol building and then sweep the building. And they, it wasn't long after that where they carted all of the Congress people back in to get back to counting the electoral votes. So we'll break that down here in a quick second, but let's finish up this memorandum. It says the summary of the conversation between Crow and McCarthy regarding key updates and security planning for the inauguration. So now we want to look forward and say, all right, well, in 9 days, Joe Biden is set to be inaugurated. So what about that? Now we have to figure out how to ensure that there is good security moving forward. Secretary McCarthy said at least 25 domestic terrorism cases have been opened as a result of the riots. Long guns, Molotov cocktails, explosive devices, zip ties were all recovered, which means they're indicating it's hinting to them that there was something that could have been significantly worse that went down. Congressman Crow, Secretary McCarthy, they talked about operational deployments underway, so specifically troop numbers and other assets, but they're not going to tell us what they are. Secretary McCarthy also indicated the Department of Defense is aware of further possible threats posed by would-be terrorists in the days leading up to Inauguration Day. They're working with local and federal law enforcement. Congressman Crow also expressed his grave concerns about reports that active duty and reserve military members were involved in these riots. Says that they're asking for investigations and potential court martials for any of those members of the military, whether active or reserve, who did participate, because they're saying they want to make sure they're not sort of housing domestic terrorists in the military. McCarthy says to finish up, he's willing to testify publicly in the coming days, subject to approval from his superior command. And then, lastly but not leastly, Crow is saying he's going to wrap up this stuff and make sure that he's ensuring that local law enforcement and everybody is responsive to any active threats. And so two things, I think this is helpful in sort of breaking down what happened, but there's still two large questions that I didn't see answered here. Number one was about that stand down order. So when a lot of videos came out over this past weekend, and some of them were just awful. I mean, horrendous, images of cops getting dragged out and sort of beaten with American flags, and just really, really gruesome, horrible stuff. And then there's also other images of sort of what looked like to just be people sort of meandering through the Capitol building, looked like they were sort of on a tour and got lost. And so when I started to kind of organize this stuff in my mind, I was breaking it out into two kind of two segments, really. I mean, at the first you had the sort of the breaking and the entering of the Capitol building, and that was extremely violent, very destructive, resulted in people getting injured and killed, as we're finding out. And one of the grossest displays of I don't know what you would call it, of rioting or protesting, ever. I mean, and it's something that should be disavowed and condemned across the board. But after that, there were people sort of just walking through the Capitol building, and some of the images that I saw looked like, senior citizen grandma type ladies who were, 70 years old, just kind of, meandering around through the Capitol building. Like, where, what happened? And so in the way that, from a timing perspective that I was sort of envisioning it was, a very, very aggressive explosion of activity and violence, followed by what looked like a frat party, or people just kind of, banging around the Capitol building. Now, that doesn't excuse what they were doing. They all knew that they shouldn't have been there. That's trespass regardless. But there was a big difference in the tone. Something happened in between those two events that was interesting. And a lot of the videos that we're seeing are officers sort of opening the doors and welcoming people in. And we saw several videos where this was happening. And you're thinking, well, wait a minute. This is the most secure building or should be one of the most secure buildings, especially on this day. We've got 100 senators, 435 congresspeople, the vice president, essentially everybody in our U.S. government is in there. And why would the police just slowly sort of let everybody in? What happened there? Where was that stand down order? What time did that come in? Who gave that? Who, is responsible for those instructions being sent out to all of the different agencies that are around? Or was this something that happened organically? I would like to know a lot more about that. And the other issue was, why were people permitted to leave the premises? Last week we talked about this idea that there was a laptop that was taken out of Nancy Pelosi's presentation room or her office. Apparently was stolen by one of these protesters, and everybody was just allowed to walk out with podiums and whatever they wanted. And we're talking once again about one of the main government buildings that we have in our nation's capital, and they're just being allowed to just sort of be escorted out. I don't know. I am not a security expert, but in my mind, if you've got a lot of individuals in a building that is a secure building, and then there may be classified information, national security materials, whatever's in there, you would lock that building down. And you would do an audit of everybody who was leaving. You'd make sure that every single person was identified, and you check their persons, and you say, hey, you're going to have a court date coming up. Let me check your ID. All right, you're trespassing here. Bye-bye. Now we'll let you out, or we'll escort you out. I don't know why that building wasn't locked down and why people were allowed to leave. I think that was a security oversight. And we had, a statement from some reporter somewhere last week who said that the DOD, or the Department of Defense, said there may actually be national security, I think they called it assets, something to that effect, that may be out there as a result of this. And so from a law enforcement perspective, I thought this is just failure across the line, basically every single step of the way. Was trying to get some answers from the congressperson here. Don't really have much to report back on, right? They're saying this was oversight and they're going to fix it. So that's what we've got. Now, that being said, they are going to be trying to solve this thing very quickly. And one of their solutions is to get the guy on top, the person who's responsible for allegedly inciting this insurrection, out of office. And the way they're going to do that is with articles of impeachment. So a resolution, at least a draft resolution, was supposed to be introduced today. I'm not sure if it has been officially introduced or not, because we just clipped this a little bit ago. This comes from NBC News. This is the final draft of the articles of impeachment, or the article of impeachment against President Trump, titled Incitement of Insurrection, expected to be introduced Monday, today, by Representatives Cicilline, Liu, Raskin, and it's got more than 200 Democratic co-sponsors. So what I want to do is go through this bill. It's not super long. It's about 4 pages. And then we're going to see what the allegations are in here. What are they claiming that Donald Trump did that is warranting him being removed from office? And so we're talking about impeachment, of course. And impeachment, in one sense, it's sort of a political prosecution of somebody in office for high crimes and misdemeanors. And so people think of it in the terms of a criminal prosecution. That person did something illegal, and therefore we're going to charge them with a crime. Okay. And, in this case, they're talking about sedition and all sorts of, treason and all sorts of, different statutes that have been written into our law, codified into the U.S. code. And they're saying he violated that law. Just like if you drink too much and you're over the legal limit, boom, you violated that law. You're charged with the crime. They're saying here, President Trump did something, violated a statute, and therefore this should be a crime. But that is one argument if you're trying to remove somebody from office. But another argument would be this is a political problem. This is something that is not necessarily within the scope of a criminal prosecution. In other words, this wouldn't go through a criminal court and follow the same rules of criminal law. But it's a political case, right? It's a political prosecution, essentially. They're saying that Donald Trump, what he did by, giving a speech and by, talking to his supporters, they're saying, well, maybe that's not so much a crime as you would find in a criminal court, but this is a crime in sort of the political context. And so if you are in that latter category, what you would be looking at, in my mind, is a lower standard. So you can be charged with, you can be committing political malfeasance in a way that's not necessarily a criminal charge. So it's easier in my mind to be guilty of a political impeachable offense rather than a criminal charge. And so you can sort of, use that analytical framework to decide what camp you fall into. Should the president be required to be held to the same standard as anybody would be in a criminal court, or should it be a lower standard where we're talking about misdemeanors, or we're talking about sort of like political misdemeanors? In this case, well, maybe it wouldn't be a crime. Maybe a jury wouldn't say that this conduct amounted to criminal behavior, but it's still bad enough that it meets the impeachment level, and we're going to ask the president to be removed on that regard. So you can sort of keep those two frameworks in your mind as we're analyzing some of this. Let's do this. Let's read through the resolution, so the article itself, and then I want to talk about a case called Brandenburg, which was a Supreme Court case decided back in the 1960s. I believe I'm going to get there. I'm going to get to that slide in a minute. But it's called Brandenburg, and it gives us a test that we can use to decide whether what somebody says, what their language was, really constitutes incitement, whether it is a call to violence. And the Supreme Court has already given us some instruction on this. This isn't the first time that somebody got on a podium and started talking in a particular manner, and it's been attempted to be criminalized before. So let's break this down. And we're going to start with the resolution itself. That is the draft that that NBC News is saying is the draft. So we don't have a name, but it's a House Resolution, 117th Congress, impeaching Donald Trump, the President of the United States, for high crimes and misdemeanors in the House of Representatives, introduced by a number of individuals. Cicilline, Ted Lieu, we got Raskin, we've got Nadler, and a number of different co-sponsors. So the first document, for the first page here, says, impeaching Donald John Trump, President of the United States, for high crimes and misdemeanors. Line number 1. Resolve that Donald John Trump, President of the United States, is impeached for high crimes and misdemeanors, and that the following are going to be exhibited in the U.S. Senate. Article of impeachment exhibited by the House, naming Donald Trump the president for whatever, okay, impeachment, so on and so forth. Article 1, this is where we start getting into the meat and potatoes. The Constitution provides that the House of Representatives shall have the sole power of impeachment, and that the president shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors. Further, Section 3 of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution prohibits any person who has engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the United States from, quote, holding any office under the United States. And so when you see that, I think what they're trying to do here is make that charge stick so that Donald Trump cannot run again. Right? If they say that this one sticks, so they're going to charge him with this in the House. If the Senate finds that he was somebody who was in fact engaged in insurrection or rebellion, then they can preclude him from holding any office under the United States. In his conduct while president and in violation of the constitutional oath and so on, he's got a duty to preserve and protect the United States. Donald Trump engaged in high crimes and misdemeanors by inciting violence against the government in that. So they're sort of fleshing out what the rules are. They're saying we've got, of course, the sort of the impeachment clause in the Constitution. Then we've got the 14th Amendment that says no insurrection, no rebellion. And then they're going to go into the facts. So they're laying out what the issue is. They're laying out what the rules are. And now they're going to talk about how the facts apply to the rules. And they say on January 6, 2021, pursuant to the 12th Amendment of the Constitution of the United States, everybody was meeting in the Capitol building in a joint session of Congress to count the Electoral College votes. We were talking about that. In the months preceding the joint session, President Trump repeatedly issued false statements asserting that the presidential election results were the product of widespread fraud and should not be accepted by the American people or certified by state and federal officials. So they're saying, they're using a lot of his prior statements. So just keep this in mind. We're talking about sort of the scope here. How far outside of January 6th are they wanting to reach back? And so they're not very clear here, but they are saying that in the months preceding the joint session, Donald Trump was making false statements. So, they're expanding that scope pretty broadly. So it's not just about what he said on that speech on this particular day, which I've commented on. I said, there's some troubling language there, sure, especially in hindsight. Now that you saw what happened and you go back and you say, well, okay, that looks really bad now in context, but it didn't happen when he said that, right? So you have to just keep in mind the scope. How far back are they willing to go? What evidence do they want to bring into this thing? And according to this document, they're looking months back. Shortly before the joint session commenced, President Trump addressed a crowd at the Ellipse in Washington, D.C. There, he reiterated false claims that, quote, we won this election and we won it by a landslide. And so they put that in quotes. So one of the things that we're going to analyze when we do get to the Brandenburg test is, where does that fall? Okay, we won this election. We won it by a landslide. And then even connect that with the preceding extended scope that they're talking about here. So if he said it on this particular day on January 6th, he also said it previously in those preceding months, similar stuff. And it goes on. He also willfully made statements that in context encouraged and foreseeably resulted in lawless action at the Capitol, such as, quote, if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore. All right, so that one looks a little bit juicier. Okay, the previous quote that they had in here, we won by a landslide, we won this election. So he's clearly denying that they lost the election. He's saying we won it. And if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore. Okay, so that's sort of closer, I would say, to anything that we saw on Capitol Hill, but does it really constitute incitement? We're not there yet, but we will get there. This goes on. It says, thus, incited by the president by President Trump, members of the crowd he had addressed in an attempt to, among other things, interfere with the joint session's solemn constitutional duty to certify the results of the 2020 presidential election, unlawfully breached and vandalized the Capitol, injured and killed law enforcement personnel, menaced members of the Congress and Vice President and congressional personnel, and engaged in other violent, deadly, destructive, and seditious acts. All right, so that I think we all know. I don't think there's any question about any of that, right? Did what happened following the speech, or subsequent to or in parallel to what Donald Trump was saying, is that an accurate characterization of what we happened? Yes, unlawfully breached the Capitol. Yep. Vandalized the Capitol. Yes. They menaced members of Congress. Yes. The Vice President. Yep. And did they kill people? Well, they've got one law enforcement personnel who's dead, and other people are injured. Was it violent? Yep. Deadly? Yep. Destructive? Yep. So I think all of those characterizations are accurate. Now, it goes on. It says President Trump's conduct on January 6th followed his prior efforts to subvert and, where'd that go? To subvert and obstruct the certification of the results of the 2020 presidential election. Those prior efforts included, and this is where they're really, I think, reaching, but I see why they're trying to do it. It included a phone call on January 2nd, 2021, during which President Trump urged the Secretary of State, Georgia, Brad Raffensperger, to, quote, find enough votes to overturn the Georgia presidential election results and threatened security Raffensperger if he failed to do so. In all this, President Trump gravely endangered the security of the United States and its institutions of government. He threatened the integrity of the democratic system, interfered with the peaceful transition of power, imperiled a co-equal branch of government. He thereby betrayed the trust as president to manifest injury of the people of the United States. So once again, when we're talking about scope, this thing's going back to January 2nd. It's going back to his prior statements about not losing the election prior to the counting of the electoral votes. And it's even including and inclusive of a call to Brad Raffensperger that also got a lot of headlines. They were saying, he was really trying to pressure Brad Raffensperger, which, in my mind, I thought that was much ado about nothing. I thought that was sort of election last minute. What did I call it? The October surprise in January. That's all that they were trying to do in my mind, because when we went through the call, we sat down and we were thinking, okay, well, this is very analogous to a settlement conference. Trump has his attorneys. Brad Raffensperger had his attorneys. They were all coming together to sit down and talk about the election. What do you talk about when you have an election? Votes. Okay, they're not going to talk about what they had for lunch or how their grandkids are doing. They're going to talk about votes, and Donald Trump is going to make his position known, right? I'm down by 11,000 votes. I got to find 11,000 votes, and how do we do that, right? That's all that we need, and so they're in a settlement conversation about that. So it was much ado about nothing in my mind, but they're trying to lump that also into the impeachment proceedings because it doesn't sound good, and a lot of people are still angry about it. But it wraps up here. Wherefore, Donald John Trump, by such conduct, has demonstrated that he will remain a threat to the national security, democracy, and Constitution if allowed to remain in office. He's acted in a manner that's grossly incompatible with self-governance and the rule of law. This warrants impeachment and a trial, removal from office, and this is what they're asking for: disqualification to hold and enjoy any office of honor, trust, or profit under the United States. So they want to make sure that he cannot come back at all, that this thing is just gone, done, and over. And and that is it for the impeachment document. Now, let's take a look at some other numbers. Can they pass this thing? According to Representative David Cicilline, a leader of the impeachment effort, he says he expresses confidence there will be majority support to pass the impeachment resolution, and he thinks that this could be by Wednesday. Some GOP members will support it. We have the numbers to pass it, is what he says. And so let's break this down a little bit further. So they're saying they're lumping sort of two, high crimes and misdemeanors into this. Number one is incitement, and then the other one would be kind of leaning on Brad Raffensperger. I think the Raffensperger thing is a non-starter in my mind. I don't think that is a high crime and misdemeanor. I've already explained that. I think it was a settlement conference. And so what I want to do is spend some more time talking about this incitement concept. What can you say? We have the First Amendment in this country. Freedom of speech, freedom of expression. We're supposed to be out there talking about stuff. Our founders made it in the First Amendment because it is that important. A lot in other countries, you don't have the ability to go and say those things. You can't just stand up and criticize the People's Republic of China, right? You can't condemn the CCP. If you were to do that and you lived in China, you might be Jack Mod, right? You're just gone out. You're one of the world's richest billionaires on the planet, and you're just gone because you said something that somebody didn't like. We don't want that in this country. And I've been a very, very big advocate of free speech for a long time on this channel. I think it's fundamental to how we govern ourselves. And the more ideas that are in the marketplace of ideas, the better. Even the bad ideas, even the awful, horrendous, gross, disgusting ideas, got to bring them out there because we want to get them into the open so that we can root them out. And we can say, this person who holds this ideology, it's this guy right here. And we can all identify that individual and, expose that person and beat back those bad ideas right in the public eye. But when you depress speech, when you tell people they can't have conversations and you kick them off major platforms and things like that, I think that's more harmful to American democracy, not better. And so our Supreme Court has also really kind of dialed in on some of this stuff. One of the big cases comes from 1969, so not early 1960s, late 1969, in the Brandenburg versus Ohio case. And you can see here, this came over from, I think, the Cornell. They have a nice little summary of a lot of cases. Let's talk about the Brandenburg test. It says the Brandenburg test was originally established in this case, Brandenburg versus Ohio, 395 U.S. 444. And it was the issue here was to determine when inflammatory speech intending to advocate illegal action can be restricted. So if you're going to be saying stuff that is highly inflammatory and you're advocating that illegal action come as a result of your inflammatory speech, when can that type of language be restricted? In this case, there was a KKK leader that gave a speech at a rally to his fellow Klansmen. And after listing a number of derogatory racial slurs, he then said that, quote, "It's possible that there might have to be some revengeance taken," end quote. It's possible that there might have to be some revengeance taken. So the Supreme Court heard the case, and they came up with a conclusion. They said the test determined that the government may prohibit speech advocating the use of force or crime if the speech satisfies both elements of the two-part test. Number one, the speech is, quote, directed to inciting or producing imminent lawless action. And number two, the speech is, quote, likely to incite or produce such an action. So number one and number two. Number one, I'm saying something with the intention it's being directed to incite or produce imminent lawless action. Okay, soon. Not next week, not tomorrow, not later, not an hour later, right now, right? It's insightful. And then it's likely to actually, in fact, produce that action. So I'm intending to say it, and it's very likely that it's going to be received in a way that's going to carry out that dangerous action. So this goes on. It says the Supreme Court in Hess versus Indiana. So in 1973, they applied this test to different cases, to a case in which Hess, an Indiana university protester, said, "We'll take to the effing street again," or later. The Supreme Court ruled that Hess's profanity was protected under the Brandenburg test, as the speech amounted to nothing more than advocacy of illegal action at some indefinite future time. Okay, indefinite future time. So it's not like we'll take to the streets, again, or sort of set in context or later, right? We'll take to the effing streets again. It wasn't now, it's not, tomorrow, or it's not next week. We just kind of don't know. It's later. We'll take to the streets again later. The court concluded there was no evidence or rational inference from the import of the language that his words were intended to produce or likely to produce imminent disorder, and those words could not be punished by the state on the ground that they have a tendency to lead to violence. Okay, so we'll take to the effing streets again. On a university protester, Supreme Court said that's protected. In the NAACP versus Clybourne Hardware Company in 1982, Charles Evers threatened violence against those who refused to boycott white businesses. And the Supreme Court applied the Brandenburg test, and they found that that speech was protected. Okay, so threatened actual violence against those who refused to boycott white businesses. Said it's protected. Strong and effective extemporaneous rhetoric cannot be nicely channeled into purely dulcet phrases, An advocate must be free to stimulate his audience with spontaneous and emotional appeals for unity and action in a common cause. When such appeals do not incite lawless action, they must be regarded as protected speech. One more time from the Supreme Court. Strong and effective extemporaneous rhetoric cannot be nicely channeled into purely dulcet phrases. An advocate must be free to stimulate his audience with spontaneous and emotional appeals for unity and action in a common cause. When such appeals do not incite lawless action, they must be regarded as protected speech. And so what is the language that they are using in the article of impeachment? Let's go back to it. It says, we won this election. We won it by a landslide. So I don't see any incitement there at all. Okay. He's making a denial of the election results. That's an opinion. In my mind, that's totally free speech. And he says down here, if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore. And once again, right, we go right back to Brandenburg. We can see here, extemporaneous rhetoric, strong and effective, spontaneous and emotional appeals for, let's say, action, for unity. Okay, fight like hell. You're not going to have a country anymore. You know, he could easily be talking about a number of different things, many of which I think are totally within the bounds. The Supreme Court has set a rule, and that rule, they've given us some guidance on how to interpret it. And by the Democrats' own language, they put it in their own documents. I think it fails the Brandenburg test. I don't think that it was incitement. And what do you think? Do you think that that was incitement? According to their rules. Now, Donald Trump has said a lot of things, but the language, the quotes that they put in their article of impeachment, we just played the Brandenburg test and showed you 2 cases from it. What do you have to say about that? I don't think it meets that level, and I don't think that he should be convicted of that. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning, it's a different standard, right? It's politics. This is not really Supreme Court constitutional law. In the Senate, this is political stuff. So he may still get impeached because they may not care about the Brandenburg test at all. They may not care about what the Supreme Court has said. They just might think that he is not worthy of being in office anymore. They don't have to apply that same standard. I think it's a good guidepost, but they don't have to apply the standard. What are the other politicians saying about impeachment? What do they want from this? Well, here is Lindsey Graham. Spent a lot of time talking about Lindsey Graham last week. Here he was on Sean Hannity over the weekend, pleading to stop this impeachment stuff.
Let me go first to this. You and I had, and I don't think you mind, we had a private conversation about the 10-day audit, and you went into a great explanation. You just didn't think it was ever going to come close to working, and that you were even saying then we should move on. Okay, I disagreed with you, but, you know, we have agreed on a lot, and sometimes we're going to disagree.
Right.
I don't like what's happening in restaurants and airports to any of these people.
Yeah. Well, number one, I want to thank the police who came to my aid. I know people are frustrated. I wanted President Trump to win so badly. I thought he was a consequential president. I think he made the world safer and more prosperous. I'm a constitutional conservative. I believe in federalism, even when I don't like the outcome. There's a process under our Constitution. I followed it the best I knew how. I stand by my vote. But now, tonight, I'm calling on President-elect Biden to pick up the phone and call Nancy Pelosi and the squad to end the second impeachment. President Trump gave a statement last night that was helpful. It hit the mark. He wants to move on to a peaceful transfer of power. He wants this to end. I've been with him most of the day. He's going to focus on his agenda.
All right, so pleading, please stop this stuff. And, you know, I'm not sure that they're going to do that. They've got the knives out. They're ready to go. So let's see what Mitch McConnell has to say about this. So we've talked about it in the House of Representatives. That's sort of like where they indict the president. So they're going to, say, we vote. There's enough here to warrant a trial. The trial would take place in the Senate. And so the Senate now has some options. And remember, in order for impeachment to go through, it's got to be 2/3 of the Senate. They got, by 2/3. So that means they got to get a lot of Republicans to join with the Democrats and get a trial done, scheduled, and flipped, right? They got to get 2/3 of that entire body that would challenge or actually confirm that Trump should be removed. Now, remember, Donald Trump is set to be out of office anyways next week on Wednesday, the 20th. So, this is timing is a big part of the equation here. It's very important that they get this done, in my mind, before he gets out of office, if they want to do it. Once he's out of office, well, what's the point of impeachment? Impeachment means you're removing somebody from their position of power. If he's already out of that position, well, what's the only justification for impeachment at that point in time? Because the remedy is to take them out of the office. He's already out of the office. Well, probably to make sure he doesn't run again. So this is what Mitch McConnell said over this weekend. He posted, or this memorandum was sent out to everybody in the Senate. This came from Sang Ming Kim over on Twitter. Says McConnell sends out a memo to GOP senators outlining how an impeachment trial would work if the House goes through. In essence, he explains how an impeachment trial would consume the first days of Biden's presidency. Memo was obtained exclusively by the Washington Post. So let's go through it. This is the article from her. She says, on the cusp of the second impeachment battle, they're saying that the proceedings would all but certainly occur after he already leaves the White House. They obtained the memo, and they're saying that the earliest possible date that they could start the impeachment trial proceedings is on January 19th. The Senate will hold 2 pro forma sessions on the 12th and the 15th. So that's tomorrow. And then I think that's Friday. It's barred from conducting any kind of business during those days, including beginning to act on received articles of impeachment from the House unless all 100 senators agree. So here's the memorandum itself. It says the impeachment procedure summary. And once again, this is what Mitch McConnell, who is in the Senate, he sent out to a number of his different Republican colleagues. Here is a summary of how, pursuant to the unanimously approved order of January 7th, the Senate rules and precedents would allow the Senate to dispose of, so get rid of, any articles of impeachment against Donald Trump if the House were to agree to such articles and get them over to the Senate before January 19th. So if they get it before January 19th, and remember, Trump's out on the 20th, here's what they're going to do. The Senate, he says, is currently in recess. It's holding pro forma sessions every 3 days until January 19th. Pursuant to unanimously approved order setting up the recess and these pro forma sessions, the Senate may conduct no business until January 19th. So he's saying back on January 7th, they already approved these Senate rules, and it says they can't do anything except these pro forma sessions at least until January 19th. The Senate will hold 2 more pro forma sessions before the 19th, the 12th, and the 15th. I already talked about those. Without unanimous consent, the Senate may not conduct any business of any kind during pro forma sessions, including beginning to act on a received articles of impeachment from the House. If the House does agree, the Senate can receive a message announcing the House has impeached the president while the Senate is in recess. Indeed, the Senate received the House's message announcing that in President Clinton's impeachment in 1998 during a recess of the Senate. If the Senate receives an impeachment message during the recess, the Secretary of the Senate notifies the Senate of the message at the next regular session, which will be on, once again, January 19th. He says here, bold, underline, and even some italics, folks, all 3. Again, it would require the consent of all 100 senators to conduct any business of any kind during the pro forma sessions prior to January 19th. Therefore, the consent of all 100 senators to begin acting on any of these articles of impeachment during those sessions. As such, unanimous consent is not given. Following the taking place, then Senate resumes regular business on January 19th. So either all of the senators agree to hear the impeachment before, or it doesn't happen. And so the earliest that can happen would be January 19th. If on January 19th, the Senate receives a message from the House that the House has appointed managers for an impeachment, the Senate sends a message to the House that the Senate is ready to receive the managers. When a sitting president is tried by the Senate, Constitution requires the Chief Justice preside over the trial. The Senate impeachment rules require that the Senate invite the Chief Justice to attend the Senate and preside over the trial. Ordinarily, that invitation would issue on the 19th. Whether the Chief Justice would actually preside over the trial after President Trump ceases to be the president, it is unclear. January 19th or the 20th, the Senate impeachment rules provide the House managers exhibit the articles before the Senate the day after the Senate informs the House that the Senate is prepared to receive the House. And so, okay, it just keeps going on. The Senate may order, however, that managers exhibit the articles on January 20th or 21st. Senate impeachment rules provide that at 1 p.m. that day, managers exhibit the articles before the Senate. The Senate then must then proceed to their consideration. And so basically this whole thing is just going to expire. You can see it, here if it's received on the 20th or the 21st, so and so. If it's after the 20th or the 21st, the Senate impeachment rules state that unless the Senate orders otherwise, once the trial has commenced, the Senate shall continue in session from day to day until final judgment shall be rendered. So, I mean, really, really just as a matter of timing, it looks like they're going to run out of time to do it while he's still in office. So it could really take place on the 19th, could start on the 20th. That's move out day, right? That's the same day that Trump is leaving the White House because that's Inauguration Day. That's when Joe Biden's going to be there. And are they going to be able to conduct an impeachment trial in the Senate the same day that Joe Biden is being inaugurated? I mean, do they want to do that? Do they want to overshadow Joe Biden's inauguration with one of Donald Trump's impeachment proceedings? Probably not. So in my mind, this whole thing seems like, once again, a sort of a political stunt, and take it for what it is. All right, another document was submitted as well. So if impeachment is not going to be successful, then the next thing they're going to want to do is try to remove Donald Trump using the 25th Amendment. Heard a lot about this last week. Mike Pence has not been particularly interested in any of this, but they're saying they're going to keep moving forward with it. So this comes from House Representative Raskin. Another House resolution says this one is calling on Vice President Michael Pence to convene and mobilize the principal officers of the executive departments of the cabinet to activate Section 4 of the 25th Amendment to declare President Donald Trump incapable of executing duties of his office and to immediately exercise powers as acting president. So they're asking Mike Pence, go around to the cabinet members, tell him this guy is not fit for office anymore, and then see if they can remove him. It is calling on Mike Pence to do the following, whereas on Wednesday, January 6th, the day affixed by the Constitution, there was a massive violent invasion, according to Raskin, of the United States Capitol and its complex by a dangerous insurrectionary mob which smashed windows, violent physical force and weapons to overpower and outmaneuver the U.S. Capitol Police, facilitated the illegal entry onto the Capitol of hundreds of unauthorized persons without going through metal detectors, other screening devices, and so on. Whereas the insurrectionary mob threatened the safety of a lot of these different people. We've got the Vice President, Speaker of the House, the Senate. There were rioters recording and chanting, "Hang Mike Pence and where's Nancy?" when President Donald Trump tweeted to his supporters that, quote, Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what should have been done to protect our country. So let's think about that for a minute. Was that incitement? Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what should have been done to protect our country. According to this document, they're not asking for impeachment under the incitement rules or under insurrection rules. They're saying it's 25th Amendment stuff. He's not fit. Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what should have been done to protect our country. The Brandenburg test, was that imminent threats? Was that immediate? Was that calling for violence and then expecting violence just from that statement alone? I don't think so. After the Capitol had already been overrun and the vice president was, quote, in hiding. Whereas the insurrectionary mob attacked law enforcement officials, unleashed chaos, occupied the Senate chamber, and even Nancy Pelosi's office. They vandalized. They pilfered government property. They succeeded in interfering with the counting of the electoral votes. Whereas the insurrectionary mob's violent attacks on law enforcement resulted in a 4-hour disruption period of the counting of the electoral votes, dangerous and destabilizing impairment, whereas Americans have died as a result of this stuff. We've got a number of different names here: Ashley Babbitt, Roseanne Boylan, Kevin Greason, Benjamin Phillips, police officer Brian Sicknick, 15 officers injured, hospitalized. The mob could have blown the building up, according to Lindsey Graham. They could have killed us all. Whereas the insurrectionary forces and protests stopped the steal. Right, so it's just kind of going on and going. We've covered a lot of this stuff. President Joe Biden, courting here, won the presidential contest by 81 million votes, defeated President Trump 306 to 232. Whereas President Trump made at least 3 attempts to interfere in the lawful vote counting and certification process over in Georgia. Whereas President Trump were sort of celebrating, this says. They were at a celebratory kickoff rally to encourage and charge up the rioters and insurrectionists to march on the Capitol and, quote, fight on Wednesday. A couple more. Another one, Donald Trump ignored or rejected real-time entreaties from Speaker Nancy Pelosi and the Senate Majority Leader or minority leader currently. Photographs, cell phones. They use mace, pepper spray, hang Mike Pence. Donald Trump has demonstrated repeatedly, and this is where they're kind of getting to it. They're saying they want it to be resolved to Mike Pence to immediately use his powers under Section 4 of the 25th Amendment to declare the president is unable to successfully discharge the duties of his office. So sort of just a laundry list of complaints there. You know, every bad thing that the president has done sort of wrapped into one document, and they're calling for his removal under the 25th Amendment. Now, there is some troubling stuff going on out there. The FBI is saying that they're expecting potentially more protests before inauguration. This came from the U.S. Sun. I saw this headline: Trump insurrection invoking the 25th Amendment, quote, could cause huge uprising and armed protests before the inauguration, according to the FBI. A bulletin obtained by ABC apparently confirming that the law enforcement agency has received reports of an armed group planning to travel to D.C. on January 16th, which is not advised, folks. The group has reportedly warned that, quote, if Congress attempts to remove POTUS via the 25th Amendment, a huge uprising will occur. The bulletin also details that armed protests are being planned in all 50 state capitals, with protests at the U.S. Capitol reportedly planned from January 17th to January 20th. The first reported day of travel will take place just 4 days before President-elect Joe Biden's inauguration. However, the effectiveness of doing so has been called into question because it is likely he could be removed from the White House before January 20th, according to the Sun, the U.S. Sun. So one more reminder that, you know, violence and uprising and armed insurrection is not a good political tool. Things go bad very quickly, as many people are seeing. We've got big tech sort of eliminating anybody who was even remotely tangentially involved in any of this stuff. I've seen new videos of people sort of not being allowed to board planes because, unbeknownst to them, they've been added to no-fly lists. And so for a long time, I've been saying on this channel that violence and even protests, which I know is sort of extreme, but they're not useful. Violence is never useful. Protests, I think, may be marginally useful, but probably not. I think there are better ways for people to express their displeasure. And so I would certainly encourage anybody watching to think 25 times before joining in on one of these things, because it's not good. All eyeballs are on this stuff, and it's very dangerous. It's not useful. It's not a good use of your time. I think there are better ways to express your displeasure. So I do not endorse any of that type of stuff going on out there. Now, the Department of Justice also this weekend came out, and they are saying they made a number of additional arrests. Let's go through one of them. 3 men were charged in connection with the events at the U.S. Capitol. We've got Washington, D.C. 3 men were charged. It looks like this guy here, Jacob Anthony Chansley, Jake Angeli of Arizona, right in our backyard, was charged with knowingly entering and remaining in a restricted building. Same charges that we've seen previously. He was taken into custody. This happened over the weekend. So Chansley is the QAnon Shaman, the guy with the painted face, the bull horns, and the fur on his head. So he got arrested. We also have... here he is. Bullhorn, 6 feet in length, American flag tied just below the blade. Another guy was arrested, Adam Johnson, 36 of Florida. 1 count knowingly entering unlawful authority. 1 count of theft of government property, violent entry. He was arrested yesterday. So this guy, Adam Johnson, was the individual who I think left with the lectern. You can see here, Speaker of the House's lectern from where it had been stored. He was carrying it out of the Capitol building. And another fellow by the name of Evans, a recently elected member of the West Virginia House, live streamed to his Facebook page, also himself joining and encouraging a crowd. He says, we're in. Derek Evans is in the Capitol. They're all being prosecuted by the U.S. Attorney's Office, FBI Field Office, and so on. They're giving you more information on where to talk about, where to send information about anybody else who is involved in this stuff. So let's go through the complaints. Okay, the FBI, we talked about this, last week. Kamala Harris and Joe Biden and a lot of people sort of on the left were saying that this whole thing was just a miscarriage of justice. There are 2 tiers of justice, Kamala said. She said there's one for the people who shower before work. There's one for the people who shower after work. And it's very clear that this is some sort of racism or unequal form of justice because nobody got arrested. And we came out and we showed there were a number of arrests that were made immediately, but there are going and will continue to be a lot of additional arrests that are made in the foreseeable future. And this is why it's not a good idea to post evidence of your crimes on social media. Doesn't ever work out. And this is from the statement of facts from the FBI. It says here, on January 6th, your affiant James Soltis was on duty and performing my official duties as a special agent for the U.S. Capitol Police. So it's not the FBI, it's the Capitol Police. I'm assigned to criminal investigations, investigating criminal activity that surrounded this particular day. It is a secured building, 24 hours a day by U.S. Capitol Police. Restrictions around the Capitol include permanent and temporary security barriers and posts manned by the U.S. Capitol Police. Only authorized with appropriate ID can you ever get in. It was closed to the members of the public on January 6th because they were counting the votes. On January 6th, there was a joint session. During the session, they were in different chambers. Mike Pence was there and presiding in the Senate chamber. It started at 1 p.m. When it was already underway, a large crowd gathered outside. Temporary and permanent barricades surround the exterior of the U.S. Capitol building. U.S. Capitol Police were present and attempting to keep the crowd away from the Capitol building and the proceedings underway inside. At approximately 2 p.m., okay, and think about this. So you want to sort of corroborate some of these timelines. We heard previously that this was right about the same time that a lot of the people, at least according to the call by Congressperson Crow, where they were talking about, they started to identify that this thing was going to go bad around 1:15-ish. And then that conversation and sort of the scattering of different officials to try to figure out how to solve this took place from about 1:15-ish until about 3 p.m. And so this sort of coincides with that timeline. Certain individuals in the crowd forced their way through, up, and over the barricades, and officers of the U.S. Capitol Police. The crowd advanced to the exterior facade of the building. At such time, joint session was still underway, and the exterior doors and the windows were locked and otherwise secured. Okay, so once again, about 2 p.m., still locked and still secured. However, shortly after 2 p.m., individuals in the crowd forced entry into the U.S. Capitol, including breaking windows. Shortly thereafter, at 2:20, members of the U.S. House of Representatives and Senate, including the President of the Senate, Mike Pence, were instructed to and did evacuate the chambers. Accordingly, the joint session was effectively suspended until shortly after 8 p.m. Vice President remained in the Senate from the time he was evacuated from the Senate chamber until the sessions resumed. So Mike Pence was there in sort of a bunker and for a long period of time, and still no information about that stand down order or whatever happened there. And I don't know if it was legitimately a stand down order or the police just on their own just said, we're totally overwhelmed, there's nothing we can do, just let them on in, because we saw videos of them opening doors and the cops saying, there was one cop quoted saying, I don't agree with you, but I respect you, and he could have been saying that so that he didn't get ransacked by the people, or a number of other things could have happened. We just don't know. And we don't get any information from this U.S. Capitol Police officer either. He says that they moved him out of the building around 2:20 p.m. and they didn't get back in there until 8 p.m. He carries on. Media coverage of these events showed one of the rioters who entered the Capitol building was dressed in horns, beer skin headdress, red, white, blue face paint, shirtless, tan pants, carried a spear approximately 6 foot in length, which you can see there, with an American flag tied just below the blade. So I didn't notice this at first glance, but yeah, I mean, it's a spear, right? You could argue that's a weapon. Screenshots posted below on Twitter show him in the halls of Congress standing on the dais inside the Senate chamber. So, this is where they're all sort of just, in total control of the building, really. They're walking around. Looks like there's a police officer here, maybe a couple more. But once they're inside the actual chamber, there's nobody in there. It's just those guys. And so the question becomes, what were law enforcement doing? What was their operational instructions at this point in time? We don't know. Several media outlets identified this guy as Chansley. You're affiant. So the guy writing this authoring this opinion says that they confirmed it's him. They're matching different things. They're matching his attire, his extensive tattoos, viewed pictures on the Facebook account from December 13th. He has a YouTube channel. He posted a video of it there. He's got sleeve tattoos. He's got, a number of different ways that they identified him, including using his Arizona DMV, the Department of Motor Vehicles, driver's license photo, and it is him. In addition, they called to the Washington field office of the FBI. Chansley called into the Washington field office to voluntarily speak with law enforcement, spoke on the phone with him. He confirmed that it was him and that he was there. He stated that he came part of a group effort with other, quote, patriots from Arizona at the request of the president that all, quote, patriots come to D.C. So when you think about that second prong of that Brandenburg test, they actually did follow, right? So whether the president intended for them to come out and whether they did it, I think it meets both elements of that, but not sort of the incitement portion of it, right? It's not a call to violence in my mind. It's just a call, according to Chansley, it was a call for him to come out to be a part of the protest. So if you sort of apply it in a different way, you can see how you can play around with those prongs. You got to meet both of those elements. In addition, on January 7th, he called in to voluntarily speak with law enforcement. I'm sorry, I already read that. Based on the foregoing, he submits there is probable cause, saying he violated this statute, section 1752A1 and A2, making it a crime to knowingly enter or remain in any restricted building without lawful authority to do so. Yeah, clearly. Knowingly and with the intent to impede or disrupt the orderly conduct of government business. Yes, of course. Pretty simple, I think, there. For purposes of this, a restricted building includes a posted, cordoned off, otherwise restricted area of the building or grounds where the president and other persons protected by Secret Service, including the vice president, or will temporarily be visited. Okay, so all of that, I think, just explains the law. Your affiant submits there's probable cause to believe that he was there, judge signed off on it, and so he got arrested and picked up, and he'll be prosecuted. But the question here is what is that going to look like? Is this going to be a sedition charge, a treason charge, or was this guy, was this a criminal trespass? Being in a place that you shouldn't be in, and we'll see what the prosecutors want to do with that. All right, let's take a couple quick super chats. I know we're early, so I'm not expecting many of them, and then we'll get out of here. So let's talk to, looks like JB. We've got JB says they wanted to put an end to Trumpism by allowing for a real bad optics scene, which is why they were welcomed through the doors. I think, JB, I think that's a very interesting point. We were talking about this last week. Who benefits from this stuff? Who is the one, who are the people that just, this is okay for them, and sort of, without being too provocative, let me just back off and say, they're not okay in my mind. I haven't seen anything from anybody who says that dead people, dead cops, a dead woman, a dead Air Force veteran, that's okay. That that the outcome justifies, the ends justify the means type of stuff. I'm not saying that. I have not seen that anywhere. But there are some people who sort of woke up for school and they weren't prepared for the test and school got canceled and they were pretty happy about it, right? There's a lot of people in the government, I think, who were in that boat. One of them was Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell, for the months preceding this day when they were counting the electoral votes, he didn't want this to happen. He was pleading with senators all throughout the Senate, don't object to the electoral votes. Don't. And almost happened, almost got it, until Josh Hawley sort of broke with the pack and said, I'm going to object to Pennsylvania. Once that happened, then there was this sort of cascade effect. Ted Cruz objected, Tuberville objected, and so on. And that is not what Mitch McConnell wanted. He wanted no objections so that Joe Biden could get nominated, the votes would be counted, and he'd be thrown into office without any controversy. And the reason why I was speculating that was so important is because if the senators, the Republicans, if they're put on the spot and they have to vote one way or the other, it makes their job during the next election season that much more difficult. If you support Trump and you were to vote to object to the counting of the electoral votes from any state in question, you're going to naturally anger a lot of the moderates, a lot of the Democrats, people who think that Trump is Hitler. And so if you are going to do that, the next time you're up for re-election, your road might be hard ahead of you. Conversely, if you object to Donald, let's say you don't object to the votes, you break with Donald Trump, you go with more of the mainstream Republicans like Ben Sasse and Tom Cotton, and you now are going to be sort of more in line with the mainstream Republican Party, but you also just broke with Trump. And so the next election, you're probably going to get primaried and you're probably going to lose, if people are still hot about some of this stuff. So prior to the Capitol Hill riots, Mitch McConnell was doing everything in his power to not let this vote come in front of the Senate. And so once they started objections and they started, Ted Cruz, I think, gave his speech, and then that was kind of it. There was a massive break until about 8 p.m. They came back in. They started counting votes. I think 9 p.m.-ish East Coast time. Most of the country is already over with this stuff. Everybody's winding down for the night. If you are on, but by the time the votes were officially counted, it was like something like 11 p.m. in Arizona. They were up until 1, 2, 3 in the morning the next day. So the country is kind of asleep already. And the Capitol Hill riots just overpower any of the news that you would see that would make it problematic for senators to run again the next election season. So I thought that, it was that kid waking up and it snowed out and they don't have to go to school. They didn't prepare for the test, so they're ready to rock and roll. It's a good day for them. And I would agree with you, JB, that it's also something where, this is being really taken advantage of in my mind. We're seeing big tech come crashing down on people across the country for a number of different reasons, and they're justifying it on the back of these Capitol Hill riots. They're saying, look, anybody who's going to be involved in violence, we got to get rid of them. So you're seeing a consolidation of power. You're seeing a lot of these conservative-ish entities, places like Parler, they're just gone with the wind, right? It was going to be the alternative to Twitter. It's gone. I'm not even optimistic that it ever comes back, because every single thing that they were involved with is now terminated. Their text message provider, email provider, credit card provider, web host, everything totally blacklisted. And so if you're a Democrat and you have something that gives you a very good excuse to go in and really clamp down on your opposition, that's a good day. Thanks, JB. Miss Awesome says, why wouldn't it be unconstitutional to give us DC statehood? DC mayor said she would officially request it in Biden's first 100 days. So I don't know why it would be unconstitutional to give DC statehood. I'm not real sure on that topic, quite candidly. I haven't spent much time dissecting DC statehood. DC is, I think, already sort of the epicenter of political power in the country. Certainly. I mean, that's why Jeff Bezos wanted to move and open an Amazon office there. He wanted to open one there and one in New York near the financial centers. He wanted it to be near the political position of power and the financial positions of power. And, to give DC, state rights and electoral votes on top of the influence and the power they already have, to me seems like sort of doubling down on it. But I don't know about any unconstitutional arguments as to why DC shouldn't be a state. I think that they can make a case for it. And I really can't speak intelligently on that, Miss Awesome. But thank you, though. We have Jackal22 as a god says, can you talk about Italygate and Trump acting national emergency? So, no, I can't. I don't know what Italygate is. The last I've looked about Italygate, it's still this attempt to sort of reverse the election. I saw some affidavit from somebody that looked like it was typed on a typewriter or a Word document and then scribbled on it with a blue ink. And then I saw some interview with somebody else. And then I saw somebody who was reading an affidavit who was saying something like, I'm reading an affidavit for somebody else, and it's still not an official reading of the thing. So Italygate, in my mind, or any of this, foreign interference stuff, the Insurrection Act, national emergency stuff, honestly, folks, I think it is totally a facade. I think it's a continuing grift that is going on and on and on. I have not seen anything credible about it. I don't endorse it. It's not because of YouTube's policies or any of these policies. I just don't think it's credible. I think that on January 6th, that was the end of it, right? They were supposed to present their evidence. They didn't really present anything. A couple people made some arguments. Joe Biden got the number of electoral votes that are necessary. They read it into the journals of Congress. That's the end of the game. Donald Trump came out and made a concession speech. I'm seeing a lot of people on Twitter and other platforms, saying, well, there's helicopters in the sky. That means they're going to take over the country, or, the power went out in the Vatican. Therefore, there's some secret forces maneuvering things around. I think it's all nonsense. I mean, at some point in time, we have to just recognize that this part of our political process is over. It's done. The best use of energy moving forward is figuring out how to reconstitute and how to organize and get behind whatever the next issue is. And in my mind, it's free speech, it's free access to information, and it's clean, fast, and fair elections moving forward. Those are the three pillars that we should be spending our time on, not trying to look at Italygate or some affidavit from somebody who nobody knows, nobody's ever heard of. If we fast forward and something happens and I'm wrong, okay, I'll come back on here and own it. But I think it is just a waste of time. There are better places for our energies. We have Grandpa's Place, who says, if the Democrats say that in impeachment that they were false claims, wouldn't it be appropriate for the defense to present those claims for con to re? If the Democrats say in the impeachment that they were false claims, wouldn't it be appropriate for the defense to present those claims for con to re? I can't figure out what the last part of that is there, Grandpa's Place. But yeah, I mean, in the Senate, if the articles of impeachment do make it there, and as we just read from Mitch McConnell, if they address them on the 19th, Donald Trump will be able to present his defense. And if the Democrats had false claims, or if you're saying, I'm not real sure what you're saying, but yeah, but Donald Trump would be able to present a defense in the impeachment proceedings. We have Sej Takahara, who says, if the U.S. Capitol free speech, symbolic gesture, incident, or insurrection, does the third section of the 14th Amendment prevent Trump from holding office? So it's a good question, and I think they're trying to do that, right? They're trying to say in their articles of impeachment that Section 3 of the 14th Amendment does prevent him from ever holding office again. They're saying that this is more analogous to rebellion or insurrection, and anybody who has participated in that is not eligible for office again. So I think they have included that in their articles of incorporation, articles of impeachment, as we just showed you. So, you know, they may be trying to do that. And I've also heard that they may try to remove, Secret Service protection from him, eliminate his pension, prevent him from running for any office ever again. And so, they're really trying to make sure that it stings on his way out. Kenneth Slayer says, if election results were legit, they would not have spent the last 2 months preventing investigation of the election materials and machinery. Thanks, Kenneth. I can see your point, but I can also see their point. On the one hand, yeah, they don't want you to access stuff that they know is bad. On the other hand, they're saying, yeah, we did give you access to stuff, and we're not going to allow this thing to go on indefinitely. We have another one. Lava Java Lava says, what's up, Lava? Says, I've noticed a positive change in my stress level since I've limited my political news intake. Conspiracy theories are like an abusive partner. Yeah, they are. They are. And you'll get really, sucked into them. And we're seeing what some of that can result in. People, I saw some images of people in the Congress, in the Capitol building, with zip ties and, very, 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 I would say, aggressive gear, let's say. And, this idea that they're going to hang the vice president, or kidnap peoples of Congress people. It's bizarre how anybody anywhere could ever think that they could get away with something like that, especially in the United States, especially in the U.S. Capitol. And I can't ascribe what line of thinking that came from, other than conspiracy theory stuff, other than this sort of QAnon stuff that, eventually there's this master plan that's going to unfold and you're all going to be vindicated. In my mind, somebody who's a U.S. Air Force veteran who served multiple tours, who is riled up to the point where she's breaking into the chamber of the Capitol to do what? I have no idea. But there must be something there, right? She must have felt like she was fighting for America, or she was going to really, dismember a corrupt political body in a way that was going to work. And I just think that people's minds have just gotten warped on some of this stuff with the QAnon and with a lot of the Lynn Wood stuff, when he's out there saying we should hang these people and there's pedophile claims and all this stuff. It's like, let's step back into reality a little bit. Good to see you, Lava. Thanks for the message. We have another one from the Wandering Mariner. Says, Madonna said she wanted to burn down the White House, and Johnny Depp asked the last time an actor assassinated a president. Brandenburg test. Good question. I think that those both probably pass the Brandenburg test, right? It's not an imminent incitement to violence. And Did Johnny Depp intend to cause somebody to go assassinate the president? I don't know. Would a person receiving that message, are they likely to go and assassinate the president? I would say a reasonable person, probably not. Wouldn't, right? Absolutely would not. Any reasonable person who heard that would say, okay, that's ridiculous. Or, it's Madonna, right? She burned down the White House. Is anybody actually going to go do that stuff? No, right? It's the same standard. It's if Madonna and Johnny Depp can do it, Donald Trump can go out there and give a political speech. Okay. If Maxine Waters can shout at people, you get in their faces, Donald Trump can say that type of stuff too. What they're trying to do is, tar and feather him in a way according to a standard that many of them themselves have already broken. And so, the right thing to do here is to just call them out on their double standard and say it doesn't match. Right? You're condemning Donald Trump for the same type of language that you have said, right? Ilhan Omar has been one of the toughest critics. I think she was drafting her own article of impeachment against the president. And, you can look back through her testimony and she said, well, 9/11 is just something that happened. Some people did something. Well, she's looking at one of the biggest terrorist attack in the history of our country is just some people did something. But when she compares it to the Capitol building, she's saying, this is really catastrophic, and now we need to make all of these adjustments to our civil rights and civil laws. So massive double standards. I think we should encourage more free speech, not less of it. We want more people to talk, not less. Thanks to Wandering Mariner. We've got Seiji Takahara says, if the Capitol incident is insurrection, what is the burning of our cities for 6 months? Is Trump even linked to the incident? It's a good question, right? And it's another massive double standard. And we were pretty hard on Miss Kamala last week about some of this stuff. Now she's saying that this is the worst thing that's ever happened. But months ago in June or July, when people were burning down buildings, torching Wendy's restaurants, igniting used car lots, when CNN was standing in front of a burning backdrop, they were saying, well, it's fiery, but it's mostly peaceful. And even Kamala Harris was out there raising funds to help bail people out who've been arrested for crimes. So it's just a massive double standard. You got to recognize that it's all just a political maneuver. They want to just really latch on the back of what happened and use it for political ends. And they'll continue to do that. I don't think that Trump was inciting insurrection. Neither would the Supreme Court by our interpretation of Brandenburg, right? And some of the other case law that is there. But they're going to run with it, just like they're going to say Russian collusion. I mean, they're going to make up whatever they want because they hate the man, and they're going to do everything they can to get him out of office. Another one from Beth. Hi, guys. I had to laugh at Biden's speech about if it had been a black mob. I agree it would have been different. They would have been kneeling before them, and Nancy would have been serving lunch. That's pretty funny, Beth. Yeah, somebody else mentioned this to me. They said, if they were black protesters or a black mob, they would have all been shot and mowed down. They didn't use, rubber bullets. They didn't use pepper spray, tasers, none of that. Well, they did, in fact, right? One of the first people I heard through the door when I was listening to it live from a reporter on PBS when she was inside the Capitol, the first person came through. She said, hey, what are you doing in here? Don't you know this is unlawful? He said, the cops started it. She said, what do you mean the cops started it? He said, well, I just got shot by rubber bullets. And she said, oh, yeah, let me see. And he pulled up his shirt or something. It was just audio. I couldn't see. And she goes, oh, yeah, that's a lot of rubber bullets. And she just say that. She's like, oh, okay. Well, you shouldn't be here, right? And he says, yeah, I know, but 1776, whatever. And so that's point number one. Number one, they did get, it was pretty aggressive. So I don't know that there was an automatic double standard there. But the second point is, this has happened with different demographics throughout our country. Different demographics have black people and white people and so on have had political protests that didn't automatically result in a massacre one way or the other. And the one that actually somebody sent this to me on Twitter, they were saying back in the 1967, I want to think it is, there was an incident where the Black Panther Party went into the California state capitol and they showed up there armed and with guns, and they were not massacred. The white legislatures didn't just mow them all down. This was something that, was very intense, a lot of tension, a lot of animosity. I think, in fact, something happened after the fact where they were, passing new gun laws and stuff with the sole target of directing the new laws towards this type of political activity as a direct response to the Black Panther movement in the 1960s. But but nobody was murdered and killed. It wasn't an onslaught of that. Now, you can draw these distinctions and analogies until the end of the earth, but the point here is, the conduct that we saw in the Capitol was very bad. I'm not excusing it at all. I don't condone violence. I've said it's highly counterproductive. It doesn't work. Even if it did work, it's not okay. It's not morally okay. It's not ethically right. But to say that this is some sort of massive aberration in the country and that nobody else has ever done this before, and now all of Donald Trump's supporters should be lumped into the same bucket as a very, very tiny contingent of a fringe political movement is not fair. It's a massive double standard. And, it's just not, I would say, it's just not morally, it's just not honest. And I don't like that. We have another one from Miguel Rodriguez. Could you explain the status and the last and future steps in the Antrim election case where was done the machine Dominion auditory? So Miguel, I think you're talking about the Antrim County election problems in Michigan, and those we did spend a lot of time covering. And I would say that I think the primary issue there was that there was like a 5,700 vote switch. It went down, Biden's numbers went down, Trump's numbers went up, and they did an audit. Dominion came and testified. There was somebody who wrote a report that was really focused on Antrim. We went through that report. We also went through the Dominion CEO's response. And, largely it's inconsequential at this point in time. We can keep relitigating the election stuff, but it's over. I said on January 6th, once Joe Biden's name is read into the journals of Congress, that's the end of the game. And I know a lot of people don't like to hear that, but those are the rules. That's the game. That's the end of the time that we have to talk about election stuff. And it's not going to change anything. Even if Antrim came back out and they said, oh, you're right, Donald Trump won this county, I still don't think that there's anything that can be done. Once Joe Biden is inaugurated, before that, at this moment in time, there is nothing legally that anybody can do to reverse the election. Literally nothing. Only thing that can happen would be to amend the Constitution to change something, because the Constitution set the rules. Joe Biden is the president-elect. He's going to be inaugurated on the 20th. And if you don't like that, because the Constitution is very difficult to amend, you've got another recourse. You can impeach him, in which case you'd get President Kamala Harris, or he can resign, in which case you get President Kamala Harris. So I know it's frustrating news for a lot of people, but that's just the reality. Test 1 says, so the speaker that is ready for a retirement home that never allowed the elector votes in Georgia, Michigan, or Wisconsin. Okay, so you must be talking about Nancy Pelosi, maybe, the speaker that is ready for a retirement home. Good to have you here. Test 1, we got Beth Coddington. We have Jake Angeli, who posted on Twitter in a pic with Nancy Pelosi's son-in-law. Nothing suspicious about that. Is that right? I have not seen that. It wouldn't surprise me. Jake and a lot of these individuals who are out there, to me, it seems like they're just, they're kind of just sort of professional agitators. They just kind of go around and they like to be at these things. There was a picture of Jake Angeli, who was here in Arizona, I think, at a BLM protest. So what's he doing at a BLM protest? What's he doing at a Donald Trump protest? Some people just like to have energy. They like to be around other people. They like to be provocative. They like to get into the mess of things. And, he had a pretty nice costume too, right? So if you're living life in that costume, you want a lot of people to see it and comment on that and say, oh man, that looks cool, or that looks ridiculous, or what's your story? I saw another video of him sort of riffing on the financial banks and institutions and a global structure of power and all of that stuff. So, is that guy going to lead a coup and overthrow America? Or was that just a guy who was partying with other people and got caught up in a bad situation? I'm more inclined to think that than that they were seriously attempting to foment insurrection and steal the Capitol building and seize the reins of the government. Ugh. Sharon, what's up, Sharon? Says, you came in early. It looks to me a lot like looks to me like a lot of show and drumhead trials a la Germany 1930s. It's getting really scary and starting to remind me too much of the trials in Nazi Germany of the officers who tried to kill Hitler. What's up, Sharon? Yeah, I did come in early. I've got a board meeting I got to get to here shortly. So we're trying to just squeeze a little bit of a show in. I know a lot of people are going to miss it, but it's important that we stay somewhat consistent, even though my schedule sometimes can make that difficult. But the Nazi Germany stuff, I think those analogies are sort of overused a lot of the time. But I would agree with you, Sharon, that some of this stuff is concerning. What they're doing is they're sort of taking everybody and lumping them into one bucket, which is really not appropriate, right? I've made the argument before that if you're going to be protesting and a contingent of your protest gets violent, then you have a duty to protect those, to stop that, right? You have a duty to say enough already. I said that for the BLM protests. Same principle applies here. But at that same time, if those protests, if those protesters are ultimately doing harm to your movement, that doesn't necessarily undermine the movement, right? The movement may be pure in heart and may have a good cause. A lot of people can be upset about criminal justice issues. They can be, wanting police reform. I'm talking about the BLM contingent. A lot of other people can be upset about electoral stuff, right? They can say the election was not fair. They can say we want, modified election rules. We want more security. We want more auditability, whatever that looks like. So those things I think are still, safe. Those are still cherished. Those concepts are still good. The contingent that acted out menacingly, that stormed the Capitol, or with BLM when they were, torching people's private businesses, those groups are separate and apart from the underlying causes. You have to be critical of those, but you shouldn't allow those to throw out the entire movement. Well, the mainstream media largely, and a lot of the Democrats, have given that standard to BLM and to other productive, in their eyes, movements and protests. So that standard has been in place for BLM, for Antifa. These people are mostly peaceful. That's the standard that they say should be applied to that. But if you're a Donald Trump supporter, that standard doesn't apply. Now, if you're just a Donald Trump supporter, it doesn't matter who you are. That standard is different. The fact that you are aligned with that political ideology is enough to ban entire platforms, literally entire platforms. Parler's gone. Gab was gone a long time ago. Now they've sort of created their own platform on their own money, on sort of isolated away from any of the big tech companies. But it's a different standard. So if they're going to apply the same concept to BLM and Antifa, in my mind, they should also apply it to the Trump supporters, but they're not, because one set of political protests are useful, the other are opposition parties, and they're going to treat them accordingly. Kenneth Slayer says, Big Tech used this to eliminate competitors. D.C. is the legal territory of Virginia and Maryland. So, yeah, Kenneth, you're right. I mean, the competitors are just gone, wiped out, and they're all slam dunking about it. They're all very happy about it. Yeah, in D.C., so if it's the legal territory of Virginia and Maryland, I don't know. I don't know how that works. Does Virginia, Maryland, do they cede some of that territory to the new state of D.C.? I haven't spent much time talking about that, but it is interesting. We have Sharon Quidney says, you're absolutely right, Rob. We need to focus on the issues at hand: free speech, fair elections, upholding the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights. Yes, I love that, Sharon. Those are good. Free speech, fair elections, Constitution, Bill of Rights. Cheers on that. We have another one from Wesley Malutama, who says people should unite by contacting their state legislature in order for them to tighten up the election process for the future elections. Yes, right on, Wesley. I love that. I've been saying that for a long time on this channel. People ask, what is the solution? What can we do? What's the answer here? And I think it's local. It's local elections. You want to make sure that your local legislature is filled with people who are interested in addressing election problems. So state representatives, state Senate members, that's where it all should start, because you have the highest connection. You have the highest ratio of representation, right? Me to my state senator might be 1 to 50,000. Me to my federal senator is 1 to 7 million. So I have a lot more influence. I have a bigger piece of the 1 to 50,000 pie than I do of the 1 to 7 million pie. So if I'm involved and active, if I'm vocal about it, and you are, then you're going to have more influence. You're going to have more sway. And if you have any local people in your district, if you have somebody who's up for office and you don't know their name, learn their name and maybe reach out to their office and say, hey, what's your position on election security, election integrity come 2022? It's going to be here soon, real quick. What's your position on it? and learn a little bit more about them. If they want your money, if they want your follow, if they want your vote, they got to be focused on the one issue. And the one issue is election integrity. Anything else is secondary to that. If you can't have a clean, fast, and fair election, how can you be sure that anything that you vote on is meaningful? You can't. It's a good point there, Wesley. Thank you for that. We have Cheryl, who says General McInerney stated that it was Antifa infiltrating the Patriots and that we had forces infiltrating Antifa. So, Cheryl, thanks for that. I do think that General McInerney is I off the rocker, quite frankly. I know that's not a popular opinion, but he's been talking for like the last 2 months about all this stuff. He's been saying he's got, a seizure of servers in Germany and all this special forces stuff. And, in my mind, the guy looks like a very nice old man who is still living in 30 decades ago. It reminded me of that guy from the movie Dodgeball. I think he was like a retired general. If you can dodge a wrench, you can dodge a ball type of guy, living in the past, just, reminiscing in the glory days, still wanting to be involved in on the ground level, but he's just not. And I haven't seen anything that he's ever said one time that has been proven to be credible. So I'm not sure that I would believe that to be credible either. Let's see. Did I just press a button that I shouldn't have pressed? I think we're good. All right. Liberty or Death says, remember when the Me Too movement occupied the Capitol and harassed members of Congress and the Senate and the Democrats cheered that on? That was awesome. A lot of that going on. A lot of that everywhere. And people are posting this all over on Twitter and all this stuff. They're going to look, what happened on the on Capitol Hill was grotesque. It was awful. It was terrible. But to say that this stuff has not been going on around the country in other places, not the Capitol building, of course, but in other places is it's intellectually dishonest. We saw Antifa throwing Molotov cocktails at federal court buildings for months. Okay, Andy NGO has been talking about this a lot on Twitter, and we've covered it. Molotov, federal court building, federal property. And in Portland, they just sort of allowed them to stay there for a certain period of time. Okay, cops didn't come out and start machine gunning everybody down. That wasn't the case. It's been a lot of unrest around the country for a long period of time. And up until January 6th, it wasn't Donald Trump supporters. Okay, it was everybody else. It was Antifa, it was BLM, it was Lord knows what. And then this one was big, it was visible, and the media made it very, very, very loud. So they're going to make this the worst thing that's ever happened in American history. But I don't think that's intellectually fair. Good to see you, Liberty or Death. Thanks for being here. Thanks for joining us early. Here we have one from BG Willia 21207. How would one recognize if a claim is QAnon or not? It's a good question. I don't really know. I've seen some evidence of these QAnoners, and what they'll say is like, Donald Trump will post a tweet, not anymore, but when he would post a tweet, they would say, oh my gosh, he posted that at 3:13 p.m. And he also put in that statement, Battlestar. Okay, so they say, okay, there's 313 Battlestar. Oh, there's Operation Battlestar in the military that was founded on March 13th. So he posted it at 3:13 p.m., Battlestar, okay, and then they'll connect all these dots, and it's like a beautiful mind where they have all these arrows going back and forth to each other, and it apparently comes up with some solution. Okay, so what this means, we've interpreted it according to our secret stone here, that President Trump is going to seize power of the country. He's going to show all of these people are liars and traitors, and it's going to happen at this particular date and time. And I watched this, and I'm going, what? That doesn't make any sense. Okay. And so you just start seeing, a lot of these things that are sort of regurgitated, and this idea that there was some insider with the government who's funneling this information out. None of it, literally none of it. Not a single thing that I have seen has come to fruition. And so there's a lot more of these claims that just keep coming out. And the clock has expired on those claims. So if it's a QAnon claim, I don't know that it's a QAnon claim or not, but I would say some of the ones that continue to be more out there, they just feel QAnon-ish, but it would not be fair for me to ascribe them all to QAnon because I don't know. And I really don't know where they communicate. I think that some of it's on 4chan, some of it's on 8chan or 8kun or one of these different, one of these boards one of these message boards. We have S Love in the house. What's up, S Love? Says, removing Parler is outrageous. Banning POTUS Twitter is a huge national issue. I don't know how we're allowing it. WTF, I am boycotting Google, Apple, Twitter, and Facebook. It is a pretty wild time that we're living in. And I'm really trying to develop a framework for myself for analyzing what to do about this free speech stuff. I'm looking back at a lot of constitutional law that I think is pertinent on this. I may be working on a different presentation, a different video to talk about how I think legally there is an opportunity for reform here that provides more people more access to information. I just got to finish it up because it's a little bit provocative, and I have to put some thought into it. So I'm working on it. I'm hopeful that I have something maybe by the end of the week. But I agree with you. It is outrageous, and there is a lot of concern about free speech just in general. The idea here that you can just silence an entire political party, essentially, is concerning to me. The people on Twitter who are, high-fiving each other and doing cartwheels over this stuff, I don't think that they are in alignment with the underlying American ideals of free speech, free dialogue, freedom of expression, freedom of opinion. They can have their own private companies, whatever they want, but if they're not embodying some of those American ideals, I think that there should be some sort of reform, and I'm working on what that looks like. Good to see you, S Love. Thanks for hopping on a little early. We got Grandpa's Place. Says, while the election is over, it should be audited. If fraud is found, they can impeach Biden, Harris, and remove them, leaving us with Pelosi. That also sounds pretty bad, Grandpa. I'm not real sure that that the country would be any better. But you're right. I mean, I would agree that we should have free and fair elections. I would agree that it's probably a good time for a lot of the different cities and states and areas of the government to do a check, right? Do we want to go through this again? In Georgia, do we want to deal with this again? Because we're going to. In Pennsylvania, what's the answer there? Okay, the Supreme Court has, I think, came out today, and they're not going to be allowing, or they denied certiorari on like 15 of Trump's remaining claims. So the Supreme Court's not going to get involved in this stuff anymore either. So now it's back to local state governments. What are they going to do about this stuff? Many of them are going to say, no problems at all. Everything was fine. This was just Trump. Trump was the one who was causing all of this concern. That's one argument. The people on the other side of that argument, this is the time for them to really tighten up some of those issues, because I don't know about you, but I don't want to go through this again in 2024. This was messy. Ryan F. says, big tech has contacts with federal, state, and local government. They are no longer just social media platforms. At what point is Section 230 not applicable? I think this is a great point, Ryan, and this is something that I'm including in my sort of framework on this topic, is Twitter really a private company, right? They use a number. So this is a response to this argument, right? Of course, it's a company. Of course, I don't like over government regulation of private businesses. But for the people who are just saying, no, Twitter's completely private, let's think about that, right? They're on a public stock exchange. They are an international company, so they've got offices all over the world, to my understanding, but they also have infrastructure all over the world, and they also use public infrastructure all over the world, right? So they're using technology and communication platforms that are sort of like tentacles throughout all of the physical locations, whether different server nodes or however that works. They're communicating. They don't own the entire internet, so they're using other people's stuff in other places in order for their company to operate. So I think you can make a very good argument under the Commerce Clause, which they've done in a lot of prior Supreme Court precedent, where they're saying that if you are engaged in interstate commerce, then you're subject to regulation by the federal government. So, which I disagree with a lot, right? I think the federal government should be really sort of removed from a lot of our private operations. But in response to the Twitter's just a private company thing, not really, right? I mean, they're very well integrated with a number of different public platforms. They also have been in bed with the federal government for surveillance for years. Okay, this is something that Edward Snowden revealed to us. Twitter, Microsoft, Facebook, all of them had back doors where the national security agencies could just go in and just kind of siphon off data from everything that they've done. So they are very, very, very well commingled in with our federal government, which makes it more analogous to sort of like a public utility than a private company, in my mind. But Section 230, the way that I read that statute, and we covered it here on this channel, Section 230 is to protect them from certain liabilities. So if somebody posts something bad on their platforms, they're not open to being sued for that bad platform. So let's say Donald Trump posts something on Twitter and that incites violence. Okay, I don't think he's done that thus far, but if he did and Twitter is concerned about that, Section 230 prevents them from liability because they're not responsible for what Donald Trump said. Donald Trump said it. So we passed that law to say we're going to protect these big tech companies. Well, if these big tech companies are now kicking those people off, saying, no, we're policing our own platforms, we're going to say who can be on here and who can't, then what do they need Section 230 protection for anymore? They're policing their platforms. Donald Trump's not on there anymore. So maybe they don't need protection from liability. Maybe Section 230 should go bye-bye. Now, I'm not, when I'm talking about this, sort of a constitutional framework for this, I'm not talking necessarily about Section 230, but I may bring that up. I may make it just a separate non-live video about this whole topic, but I'm not sure yet. It's a little provocative even for me. We've got Jackal22 is a god. Bobby Spoon says, on whitehouse.gov, Trump activated executive order national emergency. So I have not seen that, Jackal. My initial sniff test on that, as I would guess that is not accurate, but we'll take a look. We have another one from Liberty or Death who says the Constitution would have to be amended to allow D.C. to become a state. The Constitution prohibits the U.S. Capitol to be seated in a state tall order. Oh, yeah. Thanks for that, Liberty or Death. Okay. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what the answer is on that. I have not studied that at all, but I will take a look. Yeah. Amending the Constitution is not an easy task. Thanks, Liberty. We got Turd Ferguson says, thanks again for your insights sent along to Faith. Hopefully you'll be able to answer tomorrow. Any thoughts on Pelosi attempt to interfere with the military chain of command? Rather coup-ish, no? I think it's completely a coup. Okay, you still have whether you like Donald Trump or not, if you are a sitting president, you are the commander in chief. For somebody from the congressional body, the legislative branch, to come over to the military and say, no, I'm going to be the commander in chief now, is the definition of a coup. So, once again, a double standard on that. Saying Nancy Pelosi went over to talk to the Joint Chiefs and say, well, before we give him the nuclear codes or anything, maybe you can talk to me about that or run that through my office, or, I'm going to interfere with the constitutional delegation of power that are guaranteed to the president. She's going to try to unwind that. And that is the definition of a coup, much more so than some 1776 Trump revolutionaries or whatever they were seizing the Capitol building for 6 hours. One's a legitimate threat to the operation of the government. One is a temporary threat to the operation of government. So I think Nancy Pelosi, should be ashamed of herself. I think she should be a little bit concerned that maybe they try to impeach her for trying to remove power from a duly elected sitting president. Whether you like the man or not, he is still the elected president. He has not been impeached. He's not been removed under the 25th Amendment, has not resigned, has not been charged with any particular crime. So he's a president. We have Cheryl who says, are you saying that right now that nothing can stop Joe Biden from being president because they signed him in? Yes, Cheryl, that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. Nothing legally in our Constitution can stop that train. It's going. Impeachment, they would have to impeach him. He would have to resign. The Constitution would have to be amended. That's it. If Italy comes out and says, we stole the entire election from you, we cannot reverse what has already happened. There's no mechanism to reverse that. If General McInerney or whatever his name is, if he comes out and he's got, a stack of documents that show that there was massive amounts of fraud everywhere, the only mechanism that we have under our law, impeachment, resignation, amend the Constitution. That's it. Donald Trump does not just suddenly, stay in power. There's no other law. There's no other mechanism to change that. All right, we've got another one from Avalon Acres. It's Tuberville. It's Tuberville, not Tuberville. Sincerely, all of Alabama. Thanks, Avalon. I appreciate that. You know, you're going to have to excuse me. I'm just a Arizona boy. We don't know much about pronunciation here. But Tuberville, Senator Tuberville, not Tuberville. Although I kind of like Tuberville better. Thanks, Avalon. We have another one from Seiji Takahara. Why do these Democrats think that being in government is such an honor that being disgraced from it really matters? Deluded and psychotic people. Well, this is their whole life. You have to understand this. You know, Donald Trump is not a government octogenarian. Okay, Joe Biden's been in office for 37 years plus years now. He's still in office. We've got Nancy Pelosi, who's been president or the chairperson of the House of Representatives for, I don't know, 2 decades. Okay, that's all they know. That is that is existing. That is power. That is their contribution to humanity. They're going to go in and they're going to do good in this world by getting elected to some position somewhere and passing a law. Like, that's their contribution. You know, they don't really create much of anything other than taking other people's resources, yours and mine, in the form of taxes, and then they don't elevate them to a higher good. They usually diminish them to a lower level of value, right? The way that we can create value in this world is I take something of lower value, I mix it with my labor, and then it becomes something of higher value. Okay, somebody comes to my office, they've got a legal problem. I mix that with my intelligence, my skill set that I've learned, with my creativity, and I take their problem, combine with my labor, and I put that into a higher value solution for them. They pay money for that. I deliver the goods. Everybody's happy. It all works. The government doesn't do that. The government, they take something of mine that I could do something better with in the form of my taxes. I could go hire employees. I could advertise more. I could start a second business. I could, make more videos. I could do a million different things and take that money and make it to a higher value. Government doesn't do that. They just say, nope, you get punished. We're going to take this money. We got to pay down a bunch of debt that we've incurred. We've got to pay off and fix a bunch of broken garbage that we haven't maintained this last however many years. We have to afford more rights to people who haven't really, done much to earn any of it, but we're going to use this as a political tool to get more votes. So we're going to promise a bunch of people raises and more benefits across the board. And so they take something that is higher value and they dump it down into lower value, and they siphon off a bunch of that money. In the meantime, a lot of it gets, I would say, repurposed to their cronies. A lot of it goes into, political expenditures. A lot of it goes into administration, and nothing really useful gets done. So but that's all they know. They're just used to living in that world. Entrepreneurs and business people and people who live in the real world, we know that government's garbage. Most of us know that. And they don't know any better. So, Donald Trump sort of getting a kick in the butt on the way out, to them, it's like the ultimate insult, because this is their entire life. And, Donald Trump's going to be just fine. I'm not particularly worried about him, but this is all these people know. It's their every waking moment, breathing waking moment is government, 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 government. Not a life that I would like to live. Turd Ferguson says, any thoughts on Twitter blocking POTUS White House accounts as opposed to real Donald Trump being in violation of Knight versus Trump interfering with communications to not just from official government accounts? Yes, Turd, this is great. So I'm like I said, sort of previously, I'm sort of fleshing out a framework for this, and this is a great point, right? I wanted to really reiterate what's happening here. Twitter is not only, they're punishing Donald Trump because they say he doesn't need a platform to communicate to 88 million people. Right? It's a top down. So if they cut off the head, everything else underneath it is okay now. But that doesn't account for these 88 million people who may have, number one, 2 rights. Number one, a right to communicate back to Donald Trump. Okay. So sort of like what you said, they're interfering with communications to the government account, not just from the government account. But it's also a very easy mechanism, and it's a reliable mechanism, and it's something that has been relied upon by the people to be receiving that information, right? And shouldn't there be some sort of a right for that as well? If you're going to be using a platform, and the government for the last 3.5, 4 years has been using this as one mechanism of communicating with you, and they just get rid of that. So it's not harmful to just Donald Trump. It's harmful to the people who want to communicate to Donald Trump or to whomever the next elected person is in that position. But it's also harmful for the people who want to receive that information. Now, there's a lot of people, I don't know about you, but Twitter was kind of boring this weekend, right? A lot of people are gone off there. It's kind of boring. I was refreshing Gab all weekend. Is it working yet? Is it working yet? Is it working yet? Still not working. All right, we'll try it again tomorrow. So, they're working on it. But the point is, it's more than just Donald Trump. Like, a lot of people are saying, well, he deserves it. His tweets were awful. Okay, but there's a lot of people who are relying on him to get their information. This was the best way to communicate to 88 million people with the stroke of a button. And that's gone now. And we also can't communicate back to him. And also, he's still the president, and he can't receive some of the feedback that he might have otherwise gotten. So it's more than just, one loudmouth person being able to communicate to a big audience. It's a pretty important discussion about free speech, free opinion, interaction of, awareness about what's going on in your government. And they just really cut that off. And there was another tweet over from somebody, I think in India, who was saying, wait a minute, we use Twitter in that mechanism. We use it in that way. We communicate to our entire population through these platforms. And if one of these social platforms just up and decides that person is no longer on it anymore, that's harmful in many ways. Very good question, Turd Ferguson. I appreciate that. I was not planning on talking about sort of the overall framework as much as we're getting into now, but I am going to be fleshing that out. I'm still muddling through it. S Love says they are government subsidized. They're definitely not private. Add Amazon to that list as well. Thanks for doing a special segment for this. It's bad. It is concerning. It's really weird how powerful they are. And I think Trump was off of like Spotify, Pinterest. I mean everything. Like there was just an order. What is it? Execute Order 66 in the Jedis, and all the Jedis get taken out just in one day. It's kind of what happened. Good to see you, S Love. All right, so I guess I'm going to have to make that video. We have another one from Seiji Takahara. Says, while the Brandenburg rule sounds nice, it really should just be a classification. This has been the internet age. Such a simple rule has been abused repeatedly. Yeah, Brandenburg is just a framework. It is old, right? It's in the 1960s. The reason why I sort of lean back on that rule is because it's on point, I think. It's talking about incitement. And it's also the two examples that we went through are talking about public speech, right? In one situation, there was a Klansman who was saying something, and another one, it was a college student, and in another one, it was a protester. And we've talked about kind of all of those things, white supremacy, protesters, and, public speech. And I thought it was on point. So I would agree that some of our free speech rules need to be updated, and I think I have a proposal for that. We have another one from Lava Java Lava. Says, what's your advice on those attending a rally in front of a well-known Twitter office in California? So my advice on that is to be exceedingly careful. I'm super concerned right now that there's going to be another one of these things, another incident, and I would just be highly cautious at this point. I wouldn't put it past anybody to sabotage one of these things, to put provocateurs in there, agitators, or for the crowd on its own to just get a little bit unruly and cause more harm than good. So I certainly understand why I love the concept of protesting, right? I'm a criminal defense lawyer. All right. My entire career is built around going after the government and saying that they did something wrong. Cops, prosecutors, judges, politicians, crime lab technologists, whatever. That's like in my blood. But it's got to be useful, and it cannot get out of control in a way that makes it worse than not doing anything. I mean, you could make the argument that I think clearly make the argument that had no protesters shown up on July 6th, that would have been better. Okay, because what happened was awful, and it just caused a massive clampdown, and it really shifted public opinion massively against Donald Trump and all of Trump's supporters across the board. Very ineffective, not useful, not good. Kind of a bummer that happened, especially for the people who are not with us anymore. Okay, we lost some pretty good people, from what I can tell. We have another one from Turd Ferguson. Says, if they invoke the 14th insurrection or rebellion, which are crimes in the U.S. Code as opposed to abuse of power, malfeasance, political crimes, does that suggest higher burden of proof, need for due process? Very good question, Turd. So, this is one where I would say that the burden of proof is going to be the political burden of proof regardless, right? I mean, the burden of proof that they were trying to, we can just look back at the last impeachment proceedings. Okay, they charged him with collusion. They were trying to convict him in the Senate. That didn't happen. And in my mind, that whole thing was not a crime, right? It was underneath the criminal burden of proof. They wanted to say that it was collusion or that it was, improper influence, essentially. And they couldn't meet that standard. So I think it's going to be a political standard. I think the reason why they're using loose language is because of that. They don't want to raise their own bar. So we talk about what Turd is talking about here. I kind of jumped into that question is standards of proof. So I've used this graph a number of times on this channel where you'll have different standards of proof. If you've watched a criminal law movie or TV show, you've probably heard of beyond a reasonable doubt. It's the highest standard that we have in law. If you're charged with a crime, they have to prove beyond any reasonable doubt, beyond any doubt, even a little doubt, if it's based in reason, and they're not beyond that, you're going to be found not guilty of that crime. But there are different tiers, there are different standards. You can have preponderance of the evidence, you can have clear and convincing evidence. These are all lower standards. So what Turd is asking about is if they're invoking, specific language like insurrection or rebellion, which are defined under the US code in the criminal code, then does that mean that they're trying to use that high standard during the impeachment proceedings where they have to be beyond a reasonable doubt of insurrection or rebellion? They're not really, right? They're using much looser language that's not codified in the criminal statutes. So so then the alternative would be, okay, well, maybe they're not trying to comply with that high level. They just want a much lower standard, which of course is what they want. If they can meet that lower standard, they can throw Donald Trump out of office. And that's their ultimate end goal. So they are going to be doing everything they can to lower the burden on themselves so that they can meet that threshold so that they can get him out of office. And I think you're right on track with that, Turd, that they're going to be using loose language rather than criminal language so that they can have a more favorable standard. All right. And this looks like it's going to be the last one we have from Cheryl. Really, last one. Okay. So here's Cheryl says, if Biden and Pelosi and Harris arrested and all charged with treason, then could the inauguration be halted? So no, right? So at that point in time, what you would do is, let's just say, for example, they're all arrested and charged and convicted and impeached and removed from office. They're all off the game. They're all off the board game here. Then what would happen is you would look to the Presidential Succession Act and you would just go down. And I think after Nancy Pelosi, it's somebody who's in the president's cabinet. So you just start kind of going around the circle. You pick the next cabinet person. I think I could be wrong on that. I haven't looked at that act in a long time, but that's it, right? And so it still would not be Donald Trump because he lost the election. So it's the rules. I didn't write them, but those are the rules. That's it for us, folks. I know this was an early and short show, so we're going to wrap it up right here because I have a board meeting that I have to get to, kind of one of those important ones that I can't join late. So I got to get rocking and rolling. I got a little bit of stuff I got to get set up for that, and I'm going to go do that. But I want to thank you for hopping on here with me prior to our normal scheduled time. We will be back on time tomorrow. Before we sign off today, a couple quick reminders. If you have not already subscribed to the channel, would love that. Would also love a thumbs up or a share. We'd appreciate it if you send it to a friend or family member or posted it somewhere, and encourage some more people to come and join us, because it's more fun when there's more people in dialogue and talking about these very important issues. So we very much appreciate that. The slides that I just went through are all going to be available in the Discord server, so you can go check that out along with a copy of my book. There is a free PDF of this. It's called Beginning to Winning: How to Fight Your Case and Succeed in the Criminal Justice System, written there by yours truly. You can get it on Amazon, but it's also free in the Discord. Go get the PDF. It's mostly for people who've been charged with a crime, but there's some little information about me and sort of how I think and how I kind of came to be. So you can check that out as well, which is my last reminder that we are a criminal defense law firm. That's my day job. That's what we do here. We've got an awesome team of people. We're very good at helping people who've been charged with crimes kind of get back on their feet. Sometimes life has speed bumps in the road, and we need a little bit of assistance to get things back on track. That's what we're here for. We're very good at what we do. We offer free case evaluations. We would be honored if you had somebody that you knew who needed a little help. If you trusted us enough to send them our way, we'll make sure that they're well cared for. So once again, anybody in Arizona, free case evaluation. You can find all of our information in the description below. Other than that, I want to thank you once again for joining me early. We'll be back on time tomorrow at our regular time. So it's 5 p.m. Arizona time, 4 p.m. in California, 6 p.m. in Central, and then 7 p.m. on the East Coast. Look forward to seeing you back here tomorrow. Everybody have a wonderful, very nice, pleasant evening. Rest up, because we got a lot more to get to tomorrow. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.